I never thought my own daughter would look me in the eye and scream, "This isn't your family anymore." But Ashley did. She stood in my living room beside her husband, Derek, with her arms crossed like she owned every wall, every window, and every memory inside that house. The house my late husband William and I had paid for with aching backs, long nights, and 30 years of sacrifice. My grandson Noah stood frozen near the stairs, too scared to speak. Derek slid a stack of papers across the coffee table and told me it was time to make things easier. I looked at my daughter, then at the room where her father's picture still hung, and said quietly, "Then let me remind you whose name is on the deed. If you believe a mother's love should never be mistaken for weakness, subscribe to Rebecca's Justice Stories and tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own child tried to push you out of your home? I also love hearing where you are watching from. The house on Maple Ridge Lane was never a mansion. It was a 2-story white house with blue shutters, a narrow front porch, and an old maple tree that leaned toward the driveway as if it had spent decades listening to our family secrets. In spring, tulips rose along the walkway. In fall, that maple dropped enough leaves for William to joke that we could build another house with them. But to me, that house was everything. William Clark and I bought it when we were young enough to believe love could solve almost anything, and poor enough to know it would have to work very hard. He was an electrician then, with calloused hands and a laugh that filled every room. I worked at the Willow Creek Public Library, shelving books, helping children find stories, and stretching every paycheck until it nearly tore. We did not buy that house because it was impressive. We bought it because it had good bones. That was what William said the first time we walked through it. "Rebecca," he told me, standing in the kitchen while afternoon light fell over the worn linoleum, "this place has good bones. Just like us." Back then, the walls were yellowed from years of cigarette smoke. The upstairs faucet shrieked whenever anyone turned it on. The back steps sagged so badly that I held my breath every time I carried groceries inside. But William saw something beyond all that. He saw Christmas mornings in the living room, summer dinners on the porch, birthday candles in the dining room, a little girl running down the hallway in her pajamas. I saw it too. So we signed the papers. For the first 10 years, almost every spare dollar went into that house. William rewired the basement after 10-hour shifts. I painted bedrooms after Ashley went to sleep, sometimes with one hand on the roller and the other pressed against my aching back. We replaced the roof one tax refund at a time. We planted roses by the porch because my mother always said a house without flowers looked lonely. And when Ashley was born, the house stopped being wood, brick, and mortgage payments. It became the place where I learned what it meant to be a mother. Ashley Clark was my only child. Bright-eyed, loud, funny, stubborn, in a way that could either make you laugh or make you pray for patience. She had William's smile and my temper, though neither of us ever admitted that out loud. She used to slide through the kitchen in her socks, shouting, "Mom, watch me," before spinning in circles until she fell over laughing. I watched her take her first steps in that living room. I sat by her bed, through ear infections and nightmares. I packed her lunches on the same kitchen counter. Derek would someday lean against, as if he had the right to judge me. There were pencil marks on the pantry door, where William measured Ashley's height every birthday. 5 years old, 6, 7, then suddenly 17. After she left for college, I used to run my fingers over those marks whenever the house felt too quiet. That was the thing nobody warned me about when I became a mother. You spend years praying your child grows strong enough to leave. Then, when she finally does, the silence she leaves behind can feel like punishment. Ashley went to college in Columbus. William and I were so proud of her that we could barely stand it. We had saved for years. We skipped vacations. We clipped coupons. We drove old cars until they rattled like coffee cans filled with screws. I took extra weekend shifts at the library. William did electrical work for neighbors after he got home from his regular job. If someone needed a ceiling fan installed or a breaker box checked, William was there with his toolbox. Ashley never knew how many nights we sat at that kitchen table with bills spread between us, whispering so she would not hear. "She deserves a chance," William would say, and I would nod, even when I was scared, because that was what parents did. We made the road smoother and pretended the stones had not cut our own feet. For a long time, Ashley seemed grateful. She called every Sunday. She came home for Thanksgiving and curled beside me on the couch, like she was still 12. She brought dirty laundry home in bags and asked her father to check her car before she drove back to school. Then she met Derek Parker. At first, I wanted to like him. He was polite in the way some people are polite when they know they are being watched. He shook William's hand firmly. He brought me a bottle of wine. Even though I had never cared much for wine, he complimented our home, but not warmly. He assessed it. "Beautiful property," he said the first Christmas Ashley brought him over. "This area has really held its value." William's eyes flicked toward me for half a second. I remember that look more clearly now than I did then. Back then, I pushed it aside. Derek worked in business consulting. Maybe that was just how people like him talked. Values, assets, opportunity. He wore pressed shirts even on Saturdays and checked his phone beneath the table when he thought nobody noticed. Ashley changed slowly after she married him. Not all at once. That would have been easier to see. She called less. When she did call, she sounded rushed. If I asked too many questions, she sighed. If I mentioned something from her childhood, she would say, "Mom, that was a long time ago." She stopped asking about the library. She stopped asking whether I had planted tomatoes. She stopped asking if her father's knee was bothering him when rain was coming. William noticed before I did. "She's pulling away," he said one evening. We were sitting on the porch, watching fireflies flicker in the yard. Ashley had canceled Sunday dinner for the third week in a row. "She's newly married," I said. "They're building their own life." William was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Building a life doesn't mean forgetting who helped lay the foundation." I did not answer him, because I did not want him to be right. When William got sick, the house became both shelter and battlefield. Cancer does not enter politely. It kicks the door open and rearranges everything. Suddenly, our calendar filled with appointments, medication schedules, scans, test results, and words no wife ever wants to hear. William grew thinner. His hands trembled. The man who had once carried a ladder on one shoulder now needed help walking from the bedroom to the bathroom. Ashley came when she could at first. Then Derek's schedule became complicated. Then there were meetings, business trips, Noah's school events, and excuses wrapped in soft voices. I never told Ashley how often William asked whether she had called. I never told her how many times I lied and said, "She'll call tomorrow." Near the end, William spent most afternoons in his recliner by the front window. He liked to look at the maple tree. One evening, when the sky was turning orange behind the homes across the street, he reached for my hand. "Rebecca," he said, his voice thin but steady. "Promise me something." I leaned close. "Anything. Don't let anyone make you feel like a guest here." The words startled me. "William, this is my home." His fingers tightened around mine. "Promise me." "I promise." He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. "And don't sign anything. Not for Ashley. Not for Derek. Not for anybody. If something feels wrong, Call Martin Hale. Martin Hale was the attorney who had helped us update our papers after William's diagnosis. At the time, I had barely paid attention to the details. My mind had been full of pill bottles, hospital parking lots, and the sound of William trying not to groan in pain. "Why are you saying this?" I asked. William looked toward the mantel, where Ashley's graduation picture sat in a silver frame. "Because grief makes people vulnerable," he whispered, "and money makes some people unrecognizable." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him Ashley would never hurt me. I wanted to say Derek might be ambitious, but he was still family. But William looked so tired, so I only nodded. "I promise," I said again. He died 11 days later. After the funeral, the house felt enormous. His coffee mug stayed in the cabinet. His boots sat in the garage. His reading glasses remained on the little table by his chair, because moving them felt like admitting something I was not ready to admit. Ashley cried at the funeral. I remember holding her while she shook in my arms. For a moment, she was my little girl again, and I believed grief would bring us closer. But grief does not always soften people. Sometimes it reveals what has been hardening inside them for years. In the months after William passed, Ashley visited less than I expected. Derek always had a reason. Work, weather, Noah's schedule, a financial meeting, a family obligation. And whenever they came over, Derek walked through the house with that same measuring gaze. He noticed the grocery store being built 2 miles away. He mentioned that older homes in my neighborhood were becoming highly desirable. He asked whether the mortgage had been fully paid off. I told him it had. His eyebrows lifted. "Good for you," he said. But it did not sound like praise. It sounded like calculation. Still, I pushed the feeling away. I was lonely. And loneliness can make a woman excuse things she would recognize clearly in someone else's life. Then one Sunday afternoon, Ashley called. Her voice was sweeter than it had been in months. "Mom," she said, "Derek and I have been talking. We don't like you being alone in that big house." I looked around the kitchen at sunlight falling across the counter. At William's empty chair. "I manage fine," I said. "I know you think you do," she replied gently. "But you're getting older. Noah misses you. We all do." Those words reached a place in me that had been aching for months. We all do. I closed my eyes and let myself believe her. "Maybe it's time we came home for a while," Ashley continued. "Just to help. Just so you don't have to carry everything by yourself." I should have remembered William's warning then. I should have heard his voice. "Don't let anyone make you feel like a guest here." But I was a mother before I was a cautious woman. And when your child says she wants to come home, part of you opens the door before your mind has checked the lock. So I said yes. I said yes because I missed my daughter. I said yes because I wanted Noah's laughter in the hallway. I said yes because I thought maybe God was giving me a second chance at family. I did not know that letting them move in would be the first step toward nearly losing everything William and I had spent our lives protecting. Ashley arrived on a Saturday morning with 2 cars, a rented moving truck, and a smile so bright that I almost forgot how long it had been since she had smiled at me that way. Noah jumped out of the back seat before the engine had even stopped. "Grandma Rebecca." He was 15, tall and lanky, with sneakers too big for his feet and hair that looked like he had just run his hands through it. He crossed the yard in 3 long strides and wrapped his arms around me so tightly I nearly lost my balance. "Oh, I missed you," I whispered. "I missed you too," he said. "Mom said we're really staying this time." Those words filled me with a warmth I had not felt since William died. Ashley stepped out next. She looked polished, carefully put together, but there was something strained around her eyes. "Hey, Mom," she said. I opened my arms. For a second, she hesitated. Then she hugged me. It was not the hug she used to give me when she was young. It was shorter, more careful, as if affection had become something she had to remember how to do. But I accepted it anyway. A hungry heart will accept crumbs and call them a meal. Derek came around from the other side of the car, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. "Rebecca," he said warmly, "you look wonderful." He kissed my cheek, handed me the flowers, and glanced up at the house. "Still beautiful," he said. "This place has so much potential." Potential, not history, not warmth, not memories. Potential. But I was too busy watching Noah talk about school. Too busy listening to Ashley laugh at something he said. Too busy believing that maybe my family had found its way back to me. The first few days were almost lovely. Derek fixed the loose railing on the back steps, without being asked. He replaced the porch light. Ashley cooked dinner and insisted I sit while she served me. "You've done enough for everyone else," she said. "Let us take care of you for once." I nearly cried right there at the table. Noah helped me bring boxes of old books down from the attic. We found Ashley's old copy of Little Women, with her name written in purple marker inside the front cover. "You carried this book everywhere." I told her. Ashley smiled faintly. "I remember." For a moment, her face changed. She looked younger, less guarded, almost like my daughter again. That first week, I slept better than I had in months. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I heard dishes in the sink. I heard Noah laughing at videos on his phone. The house had noise again. And noise after grief can feel like mercy. But little things began to shift. At first, they were so small that I scolded myself for noticing. Ashley moved the coffee maker from the left side of the counter to the right. "It makes more sense here," she said. Then she rearranged the spice cabinet. "You had expired things in there." "Mom." Then she folded William's old flannel blanket from the back of his recliner and placed it in the hall closet. "I just thought the living room looked cleaner without it." I stood in front of that closet after she walked away, staring at the folded blanket as if it were William himself being tucked out of sight. I told myself she meant well. Then came the curtains. One afternoon, I returned from the grocery store and found Ashley standing in the living room with a measuring tape while Derek held fabric samples against the window. "What is all this?" I asked. Ashley turned with a bright, practiced smile. "Just freshening things up." I looked at the blue curtains I had sewn myself years ago. They were faded. Yes, but William had loved them because he said they made the room feel like morning, even on rainy days. "I like these curtains," I said. Ashley's smile tightened. "Mum, they're old." Derek gave a small chuckle. "A little updating wouldn't hurt. Houses like this need to stay current." "Houses like this?" I set the grocery bags on the table slowly. "I'm not planning to sell it," I said. The room went quiet for half a breath. Then Derek smiled. "Of course not. I didn't mean anything by it." But his eyes moved toward Ashley, and hers moved away from mine. A few days later, the framed photographs on the mantel changed. William and me at our 25th anniversary dinner had been moved to a side table. Ashley's family portrait took the center spot. Noah in a navy blazer. Ashley in a pale blue dress. Derek standing behind them with one hand on each of their shoulders, smiling like a man who owned everything in the frame. I stood there looking at it while Ashley came down the stairs. "Looks nice, doesn't it?" she asked. "It does," I said carefully. "But where did you put the picture of your father?" "It's still there." She pointed to the side table. "I just thought this one should be more visible since we're all living here now." We're all living here now. Again, I swallowed my discomfort. Again, I chose peace. That was something I had done my whole life. Smoothed the tablecloth. Lowered my voice. Let things pass because I believed love was worth more than being right. But peace without respect is not peace. It is surrender wearing a gentle face. I did not understand that yet. The first person to say something plainly was Linda Harper, my neighbor of 22 years. Linda was a retired school secretary with silver curls, sharp eyes, and a way of noticing things before anyone told her. She had brought casseroles after William died and sat with me on evenings when I could not bear the silence. One morning, she waved me over while I was getting the mail. "How's it going with the full house?" she asked. "It's nice," I said. "Different, but nice." Linda studied me over the top of her glasses. "Different good? Or different strange?" I gave a small laugh. "You always did ask questions like a principal." I worked for 3. Learned from the best. I looked back at my house. Derek was standing near the driveway, talking on his phone. One hand was in his pocket. His eyes were on the roofline. Linda lowered her voice. "He asked me something yesterday." "What?" "He asked whether you had ever talked about selling." My stomach tightened. "What did you say?" I told him it wasn't my business. Linda paused. Then I told him that William loved that house too much to let anybody treat it like a real estate project. I stared at Derek. "Maybe I'm reading too much into it," I said. Linda's expression softened, but it did not change. "Rebecca, you have been kind your entire life. But kindness doesn't mean you ignore a warning." I nodded as if I understood, but I was still not ready to believe it. That evening, Derek ordered expensive Italian food and made a show of setting the table. "Rebecca deserves a break," he announced. Ashley smiled at him proudly. During dinner, Derek began talking about the neighborhood again. New businesses, property taxes, home equity, nearby sales. Finally, I put down my fork. "Why are you so interested in what this house is worth?" His smile did not disappear. It only cooled. "I'm interested because I care about your future." "My future?" "Of course. You're alone? You have a large property. There are smart ways to make sure you're protected." Ashley stared at her plate. I felt something inside me turn very still. "Your father wanted this house to be a home," I said. "Not a strategy." No one spoke for a moment. Then Noah cleared his throat and asked if anyone wanted more bread. I loved that boy for trying. After dinner, I washed dishes alone. Not because Ashley forced me to. Exactly. But because old habits are hard to surrender, even when people are standing nearby claiming they want to help. Noah came into the kitchen carrying 2 glasses. "I'll do those," he said. "You don't have to." "I want to." We worked quietly for a few minutes. Then he lowered his voice. "Grandma?" "Yes." "Sweetheart?" "Dad says weird stuff when you're not around." My hands stopped beneath the running water. "What kind of stuff?" Noah swallowed. "That you're having trouble keeping up. That they had to move in because you need help. That this place is basically becoming theirs anyway." The kitchen seemed to tilt around me. "Who has he told that to?" "I don't know. People on the phone. Sometimes his friends." I turned off the faucet and dried my hands slowly. "You did the right thing telling me." Noah looked frightened. "Are you mad?" "Not at you." I placed my hand over his. "Never at you." That night, I went to the small back bedroom and took William's metal document box from the closet. I had not opened it since the week after his funeral. The key was taped beneath the bottom drawer of my jewelry box, exactly where William had always kept it. My hands shook as I unlocked the box and lifted the lid. Inside were tax records, insurance papers, bank statements, and a thick folder labeled House Documents in William's careful handwriting. I pulled it out and placed it on the bed. Then I found a smaller envelope tucked beneath it. Across the front, In William's handwriting were 6 words. For Rebecca. If you ever need it? For a long time, I only stared at that envelope. Outside the bedroom, I heard Derek's footsteps move down the hallway. I heard Ashley laugh softly at something he said. I heard Noah close his bedroom door. And in the room they had pushed me toward, with my husband's letter trembling in my hands. I finally understood something. They had not moved me out of the way. They had moved me closer to the truth. Saturday arrived cold and gray. The kind of afternoon when the sky hangs low over the neighborhood and every room inside a house feels a little dimmer than usual. I spent the morning doing ordinary things. I watered the plants in the kitchen window. I folded a load of towels. I put William's blue curtains back up in the living room. Ashley had removed them weeks earlier and replaced them with beige panels she said looked more modern. I had found my old curtains in a storage bin in the basement, folded beneath a box of Derek's office supplies. When I hung them again, the room changed. Not dramatically, not magically, but it looked like mine. At 2:45, I made coffee and placed cups on the dining room sideboard. At 2:50, I checked my phone. Martin had sent a short message. I'm nearby. Call if they begin without you. At 3 o'clock exactly, the doorbell rang. Ashley opened it before I could reach the foyer. The realtor was a woman in her 40s named Melissa Grant. She wore a camel-colored coat, carried a leather portfolio, and had the polite expression of someone who had walked into a family problem without realizing how deep it went. Mrs. Clark, she said when Ashley introduced us. It's lovely to meet you. Rebecca, I said. Please call me Rebecca. Derek stood behind her with one hand resting lightly on Ashley's shoulder. Melissa is just here to discuss options, he said. Nothing has been decided. I looked at the portfolio in her hand. There is something about paperwork that tells the truth before people do. No, I said. Nothing has been decided. Noah was sitting in the armchair by the window. He looked as though he wanted to disappear into the cushions. Linda arrived 2 minutes later. Derek had not invited her. I had. When he saw her step through the front door, his expression tightened. Why is Linda here? He asked. Because I wanted a witness, I said. Linda removed her coat slowly. Good afternoon. Derek. He did not answer. We gathered in the living room. My living room. The room where William had taught Ashley to play checkers. The room where Noah had opened Christmas presents. The room where I had spent so many nights sitting beside my husband after his illness made him too tired to climb the stairs. Now it felt like a courtroom. Melissa opened her portfolio and arranged several pages on the coffee table. A market analysis. Comparables sales. A proposed listing agreement. I looked at the last document for a long time. There it was. My house. Reduced to an address, an estimated range, and a signature line. Derek sat forward. Rebecca, we have been trying to help you understand the possibilities. The house is more than you need now. It is expensive to maintain. It is too large for one person. It is paid off. I said, property taxes go up. Repairs happen. You cannot live here forever. Maybe not, but I live here now. Ashley pressed her lips together. Mom, nobody wants to force you out. I looked at her. Then why is a realtor sitting in my living room with a listing agreement already prepared? Ashley glanced at Derek. Not at me. At Derek. That was the moment I understood how far she had allowed him to lead her. Melissa shifted in her chair. To be clear, she said carefully, I was told that the family had discussed a possible sale and that you were considering downsizing. I was not, I said. Derek gave a frustrated sigh. Rebecca, we discussed it. No. You and Ashley discussed it. Then you told me what you had decided. The room went quiet. Noah stared at the floor. Derek tried to smile, but anger had begun to show around the edges. You are making this sound much worse than it is. Emmy? He looked at Melissa. She has been under a lot of stress since her husband passed. The sentence did not hurt me. Not the way he wanted it to. Because Martin had warned me about this. The moment someone needs you to seem confused, emotional, or incapable, they are no longer speaking about your well-being. They are building an excuse to take your voice away. I reached for my phone. I am going to call my attorney, I said. Derek sat back sharply. Why? Because I choose to. Ashley's face went pale. Mom, please. We can talk without lawyers. Then why did you bring legal documents into my home? We were only trying to prepare. No? I said. You were trying to gain control. Derek stood. That is ridiculous. Noah heard you say that signing the paperwork would make selling the house easier. Derek turned toward his son. Noah looked terrified. But this time, he did not look away. I heard you, Noah said. You said it in your office. Ashley's eyes filled with tears. Derek, she whispered. Tell me that isn't true. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Then the front door opened. Martin Hale stepped inside, carrying a dark briefcase. I had given him a key years earlier when William was sick. He had knocked first. But nobody had heard him over the arguing. Mrs. Clark, he said calmly. I hope I'm not interrupting. Derek's face changed. For the first time since he moved into my home, he looked frightened. Martin greeted Melissa politely, shook Linda's hand, and sat beside me on the sofa. Then he opened his briefcase. I understand there may be some confusion about ownership and authority, he said. Melissa closed her portfolio. I was told Mrs. Clark was ready to explore a listing. I am not, I said. Martin nodded. Then there is no listing to discuss. Derek crossed his arms. Rebecca owns the home. We know that. Nobody said otherwise. No, Martin said. But certain statements made by you suggest that you expected to exercise authority you do not have. Derek's mouth tightened. What statements? Martin removed a document from his file. Mr. Parker. Several months ago, you contacted my office and asked about procedures for transferring or selling property owned by an elderly relative. Ashley turned toward Derek. You called Martin? Derek did not look at her. I was gathering information. Martin continued. You also asked whether a power of attorney could be used to complete a sale if the owner was reluctant or emotionally overwhelmed? The room became silent. I could hear the ticking of William's old clock on the mantel. Ashley stared at Derek. You said the power of attorney was only in case something happened to Mom. It was, Derek said quickly. Martin looked at him. Then why were you asking how to sell a house if the owner was reluctant? Derek gave a short laugh. You are twisting my words. No, Martin said. I documented them. That was the difference between an argument and evidence. An argument can be denied. Evidence waits patiently. Martin placed another paper on the coffee table. Mrs. Clark's house cannot be sold, refinanced, transferred, or used as collateral without her informed consent, independent legal counsel, and a waiting period that gives her time to reconsider. A power of attorney does not override those protections. Derek looked down at the document. For a moment, all the confidence drained from him. Ashley read the page over Martin's shoulder. You knew? She asked. Derek said nothing. You knew Mom's house was protected? I knew he had an attorney. Derek muttered. That isn't what I asked. Her voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of a daughter defending a husband. It was the voice of a woman beginning to see the truth. She had refused to see. Martin opened another folder. Mrs. Clark also asked me to review the documents Mr. Parker gave her, he said. They were not standard emergency precautions. The proposed power of attorney would have granted broad authority over her accounts, property, and finances. Ashley's eyes widened. You told me it was limited. Derek looked away. And the medical paperwork? She asked. Martin's expression remained calm. Some of the provisions would have allowed decisions to be made without Mrs. Clark's input under circumstances that were not clearly defined. Ashley took one step away from Derek. Then another. It was only a few inches. But it looked like a mile. Melissa gathered her papers. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I was not aware that you had not agreed to this meeting. You were told what Derek wanted you to be told, I said. She nodded. I will remove this property from my records. There will be no listing. Derek turned on her. You can't just walk away. Melissa looked at him, and her polite expression disappeared. I can, and am. I work with homeowners. Mr. Parker. Mrs. Clark is the homeowner. She has made her decision. Then she left. The front door closed behind her. Derek stood in the center of my living room, breathing hard. His plan was collapsing, and he had no place left to hide it. Ashley wiped her eyes. Why? She asked him. He did not answer. Why did you lie to me? I was trying to save us. Save us from what? Derek looked toward Noah, then toward me. Then, at last, he sat down. His shoulders dropped. The performance was over. My company is failing, he said. Nobody moved. I had a partner who mishandled money. Clients left. We borrowed to cover payroll. Then we borrowed again. He rubbed both hands over his face. I thought I could fix it. Ashley looked sick. How much? Derek did not answer. How much? Derek? His voice was barely a whisper. More than 400,000. Noah made a small sound from the chair by the window. Ashley closed her eyes. All those months. The pressure. The lock. The papers. The conversations about assisted living. The attempt to make me seem incapable. It had never been about helping me. It had been about rescuing Derek from the consequences of his own choices. You were going to use my house to pay your debt, I said. Derek looked at me. I was going to make sure we had a future. You were going to take mine? He flinched. Good. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because some truths need to land. Ashley began crying openly. I thought we were struggling, she said. You told me we were just behind. I was trying to protect you. No, she said. You were using me. Derek stood again. Fine. Blame me for everything. You have no idea what it feels like to be drowning. I looked at him. My husband was dying in the room upstairs. Derek, I know what it feels like to drown. He stopped. But being desperate does not give you the right to drag someone else under with you. Noah stood beside his mother. Dad, he said quietly, you said Grandma would be happier somewhere smaller. Derek looked at him. Noah's eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. You said she didn't need this house anymore. But she does. This is her house. Ashley covered her mouth. I saw the moment she understood what her son had been carrying. He had heard them. He had watched them. He had been expected to keep quiet, while the adults around him tried to turn his grandmother into a problem that needed to be removed. Derek took a step toward Noah. Buddy. No, Noah said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I don't want to hear you explain it again. Derek's hand fell to his side. Martin closed his file. Mr. Parker, he said. I recommend that you seek your own legal advice concerning your business debts. But from this point forward, you are not to represent that you have authority over Mrs. Clark's property, accounts, or care decisions. Derek laughed bitterly. And if I do? Then Mrs. Clark will have records of what occurred, witnesses who can confirm it, and legal options available to protect herself. Linda folded her arms. I saw enough myself. Derek looked around the room. At Martin. At Linda. At Noah. At Ashley. Then he finally looked at me. For months, he had looked through me, around me, past me. But now he looked at me as though he was seeing, for the first time, that I was not a lonely widow he could pressure into surrendering. I was the owner of the home. I was the mother he had underestimated. And I was the woman who had finally decided to believe herself. Derek, I said, you need to leave my house. Ashley's head snapped toward me. Derek stared. What? You need to pack a bag and leave today. You can't throw me out. I can ask a person who has no ownership interest and no permission to remain here to leave. You may return later. With Ashley's agreement. To collect your belongings? But not alone. And not tonight. His face reddened. You're destroying this family. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Not triumph. Peace. No. I said. I am refusing to let you destroy it any further. Derek looked at Ashley. She was crying. But she did not defend him. For a long moment, he stood there. Then he walked upstairs. Noah sat down beside me on the sofa. He leaned his head against my shoulder, exactly the way he had when he was small. I put my arm around him. Ashley stayed across the room, staring at William's photograph on the mantel. After several minutes, she whispered, Mom. I looked at her. I'm sorry. The words were broken. Not polished. Not strategic. Not designed to end the conversation. Real? I'm sorry I didn't listen, she said. I'm sorry I let him make you feel like you didn't belong here. I'm sorry I treated your home like it was a solution to our problems. My heart hurt. Because she was still my daughter. But love is not the same thing as immediate forgiveness. And forgiveness is not the same thing as renewed access. I hear you, I said. Ashley nodded through tears. I know that isn't enough. No, I said gently. It isn't. Not yet. She lowered her head. But it is where truth begins. Derek left that evening with a duffel bag and a coat over his arm. He did not yell. He did not apologize. He only stood at the front door for a moment, looking back at the living room as though he could not understand how a plan he had worked so carefully to build had come apart. But it had never been a strong plan. It had been built on lies, pressure, and the belief that a kind woman would not fight back. Those things always collapse eventually. The next morning, I changed the lock. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted to come home without wondering whether I still belonged there. I chose the code myself. The following week, Martin helped me update my documents. I appointed a trusted professional as a backup decision-maker for financial matters. Someone who had no reason to benefit from my fear or confusion. I also made it clear, in writing, that no future housing decision could be made without my direct consent and independent advice. I did not disinherit Ashley. I did not want to punish her forever. But I made one thing clear. Love would no longer give anyone automatic access to my home, my money, or my choices. Ashley moved into a small apartment with Noah while she figured out what came next. Derek stayed with his brother for a while and later hired an attorney to deal with the debt from his business. I did not celebrate his downfall. People sometimes think justice means watching someone lose everything. I do not. Justice meant that he could no longer take what was mine to avoid facing what was his. It took Ashley months before she could speak to me without crying. When she finally asked whether we could have lunch, I chose a small diner halfway across town. Neutral ground. Not my house. Not her apartment. Somewhere neither of us could claim as emotional territory. She arrived early. So did I. For several minutes. We sat with coffee between us, listening to plates clatter in the kitchen. Then Ashley looked at me. I said something that day I can't stop thinking about. I knew what she meant. "This isn't your family anymore," she whispered. Yes. Tears filled her eyes. I meant it for a second, and I hate that I meant it. I looked at my daughter, the little girl who once ran through my kitchen in socks. The teenager who had hugged me after graduation. The adult woman who had allowed fear to turn into cruelty. "I believe you hate it," I said. "Can you forgive me?" I took a breath. "I can forgive you. But forgiveness does not mean we pretend it never happened." She nodded quickly. "I know. It does not mean you get a key to my house again. It does not mean you make decisions for me. It does not mean you can bring Derek back into my life because you feel sorry for him. I know. And it does not mean I stop loving you." Ashley began to cry. That was the first time I believed she truly understood the difference. We did not return to the relationship we had before. Some things cannot be restored by pretending they were never broken. But we began building something more honest. Ashley started therapy. She met with a financial counselor. She learned how much Derek had hidden, how many signs she had ignored, and how often she had mistaken loyalty for love. Noah kept coming to see me every Sunday. Sometimes we baked. Sometimes we watched old movies. Sometimes we sat on the porch and did nothing at all. But he knew something now that I hoped he would never forget. Being family does not mean staying quiet when someone you love is being hurt. Nearly a year later, I sat on my front porch with a cup of coffee and William's photograph beside me. The blue curtains were still in the living room. The maple tree still leaned toward the driveway. Inside, the house was quiet again, but it did not feel empty. It felt peaceful. My phone buzzed. A message from Ashley. "Love you, Mom. Thank you for teaching me that boundaries are not cruelty." I read it twice. Then I looked toward the house William and I had built together. For so long, I thought the house was the heart of this story. But it was not. The house was only the place where the truth finally became impossible to ignore. The real lesson was that family cannot be defined by who demands access to you. Family is defined by respect. Love without respect becomes control. Sacrifice without boundaries becomes resentment. And forgiveness without wisdom becomes permission for the same wound to happen again. I had spent too much of my life believing that being a good mother meant making myself smaller. I know better now. I can love my daughter without giving up my voice. I can forgive her without handing back control. And I can grow older without becoming invisible. If this story touched you, please like this video, subscribe to Rebecca's Justice Stories, and share it with someone who may need a reminder that dignity has no age limit. In the comments, tell me, would you have forgiven Ashley after what she did? Or would you have walked away completely? I read every comment, and I would truly love to hear your thoughts.